How do you feel about it? What do you put the odds on?
The best the U.S. has done is the quarterfinals, is the last 8 in 2002. If they can win their group, I would give them a 50-50 chance of making the quarterfinal.
In my 40 years of doing this stuff on Sport Fans, if someone were to say what one word sums all of this up, without question, connections. It provides people with a sense of community, with a sense of camaraderie.
In 1950, the U.S. scores one of the great upsets to this day in World Cup history when they beat England 1-0 with a team made up of literally dishwashers and like paint strippers. The funnest European team is Portugal if they bench Cristiano Ronaldo.
You got to unpack that one.
They've talked about sport being the great equalizer. I could argue that fandom is the great unifier.
The father told their kids were like, hey, how long do you want us to keep you around with the, advanced medical care when it's clear to the end? And he stopped and he goes, as long as I can watch football while I eat ice cream, keep me going. Welcome to 2%. I'm your host, Michael Easter. The World Cup is in full swing. Now, most Americans, we only give a shit about soccer every 4 years, but today we are going to make a case why you should care. So we are going to talk to Leander Schaerlaeckens. He wrote a book called The Long Game about why Team USA might actually be great this year and why this year's World Cup is better than ever. And then after that, we'll bring on Daniel Wann. He's a professor of psychology who looks at why sports fandom is uniquely good for mental health, and he'll explain exactly how to get the benefits. Start with Leander. All right, thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to do it.
All right, so 2026 World Cup. I believe you said that in terms of sheer footprint and cultural weight, this is going to be like the biggest sporting event in human history. It's like multiple Super Bowls a day. Why is it different?
I think there's an argument to be made, and it sounds super hyperbolic, but I can't think of anything that's been bigger in just humankind, period. Because it's going to be 104 games over 39 days. It's going to sprawl over all of North America. It's the sporting event that the entire world locks into, more so than the Olympics, more so than anything else. The organizers describe it, and this is maybe a little much, as 4 Super Bowls a day for 39 days. That's an exaggeration, but it's not that far off when you consider that a World Cup final, in terms of viewership, attracts something like 10 times the viewing numbers that the Super Bowl final or that the Super Bowl gets, right? So like you're talking about absolutely massive numbers. Revenue that FIFA predicts will be between $11 and $14 billion for this tournament. So just the sheer volume of everything involved here is just unprecedented.
If we do the math on that, what does Super Bowl get? Like 80 to 100 million viewers. So we're talking about almost like 1 billion viewers.
The Super Bowl, I think, runs usually 110 to 120 million viewers. And a World Cup final always is north of 1 billion viewers globally.
Amazing. And they have more, is that right? They have more teams this year in this year's World Cup?
Yes. So up until the last World Cup, there were 32 teams who would play 64 games. Now there's going to be 48 teams who will play 104 games. And what's worth noting here is that the last World Cup that was held in the United States in 1994 only had 24 teams playing 52 games. That World Cup set attendance records in total attendance and average attendance that still stands, even though all of the subsequent World Cups were expanded. So the fact that now it's coming back here with double the footprints, double the teams, double the games, it should absolutely shatter the attendance records, even for the World Cup.
Amazing. And so speaking of America and USA, I feel like most Americans, this is one of those things where every 4 years we go, oh yeah, soccer's a sport. I think maybe I'll watch some soccer. Does America have a team there? Make a case for why people should care about Team USA this year, despite the fact that we have not been spectacular in the past.
I think that part of the reason the U.S. has that relationship, especially with men's soccer, is because there's this kind of assumption in this country that any sport we take seriously, we should either dominate or be sort of one of the world's top teams in. And soccer we've taken seriously for a long time, and we're not there yet, because the difficulty is that there's 210 other national teams who also take the sport really seriously, and who in some cases have a half-century head start on us, if not longer. But this team is really interesting for lots of ways that I got into in my book, which is that they're delightfully diverse. You know, there's players from the borderlands in El Paso and players from California and players from every corner of the country. There's players who grew up in the Netherlands and in Germany and in the UK. They just have stories from all walks of life, from, being affluent growing up to players who kind of had to scrape by. And so in that sense, I think that this team reflects a lot of the qualities that many Americans like to see in their country, which is that it's a melting pot and that it's a lot of people coming together from varied backgrounds and sort of pulling in the same direction and giving their best and trying to bring this team to maybe a higher place than its talent necessarily kind of dictates that they should be at for this World Cup. If they make it to the quarterfinals, the last 8, they'll have had a very, very strong World Cup. So they're an underdog in that sense, which is not a position that we're super used to being in as a sort of an American national team concept. So there's a lot to like about this team. There's a lot of interesting characters, a lot of interesting backstories.
When's the last time we've made the top 8 once? Is that correct?
Twice, if you count the very first World Cup. Okay. In 1930, the first World Cup was played in Uruguay, and only 13 teams showed up.
Okay.
One of them was the United States, nice. And they placed 3rd at that World Cup. But kind of in the modern era, the best the U.S. has done is the quarterfinals, is the last 8 in 2002, which is also when they won their only knockout game that they've ever won, which was against regional rivals Mexico, no less. Which is a team they knew very, very well. So this time around, because the tournament's expanded to get to the quarterfinals, which I think is sort of the benchmark that they should aim for, they'll have to win 2 knockout games, which means that they would have to triple the number of those games that they've won in their entire history. How
do you feel about it? What do you put the odds at?
What's really, really important is to win the group, even though the group stage this time is really forgiving. At the previous World Cups, there were 8 groups of 4 teams. They play a round robin. The top 2 teams advance. The bottom 2 teams are eliminated. Now there's 12 groups of 4. They play a round robin. The top 2 teams advance automatically, and then 8 of the 12 best third-place teams advance as well. But that redounds to your seeding in the rest of the bracket. So it's going to be important for the U.S. to win their group, because if they don't, they might run into Argentina in the 3rd round, which you want to avoid. They're the defending world champions, Lionel Messi. I'm sure everybody's familiar. So if they can win their group, which means doing better than Turkey, which is a good team, I would give them a 50-50 chance of making the quarterfinal. If they don't, it's going to get sticky pretty quickly.
And so is the main reason that we have not been as good at soccer, is it just cultural? You said other countries have had a head start, whereas basketball, we invented the game. We've dominated it for years. So we're always going to be in the top. And with soccer, it's just been completely different.
I think there's a few different factors. I think most countries in the world are kind of sporting monocultures, right? Where they play other sports, but, almost all of the resources, almost all of the talent goes towards soccer. And they've been continually improving for 100 years, right? And building. And what happened in the US, we actually had a brief golden age in the 1920s when some of the best players in the world were coming to play in the US because this is where the highest salaries were. And then that league collapsed in the Great Depression, and sort of domestic soccer, a national soccer league didn't really exist again until the 70s. And then that one collapsed, and not until Major League Soccer in 1996 have we had sort of a continuous, solid soccer infrastructure. So all of that means that, the national team has had this really kind of patchwork history and structure that it was built on. And that's why we weren't at a World Cup from 1950 to 1990, because we just didn't have the infrastructure to develop players. So given all of that, it's a bit of a miracle, sporting wise, that we are where we are these days, because we had an awfully long way to go.
Well, that's good news. This makes me feel better about Team USA. 2018 though, right? We didn't make it. What did we learn from that experience? Did that become a catalyst for sort of the hope you have moving into the team we have now?
In several ways it did. For a start, that was kind of a reality check, because from 1990 through 2014, the U.S. had made every World Cup. And even the great nations in soccer don't qualify for every World Cup, right? Italy has now missed 3 in a row, which is crazy, given that they've won it 4 times. They're one of just 8 countries to have won the World Cup at all. So it kind of woke a lot of people up. There was a little bit of complacency that it's crept in, but it also allowed a new team to be built in its place. That team had a lot of veterans. It had a bit of a chemistry issue, shall we say. And so that kind of wiped the slate clean for Christian Pulisic and the new generation, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, for those guys to come in and really seize the national team. And it also allowed them to kind of start rebuilding in the shadows when people weren't really paying attention to the national team for a few years. Because when you miss the World Cup in a country that really only locks in on soccer, for that month every 4 years, you're not going to get a whole lot of eyeballs on you and what you're doing. And sometimes that can be a good thing.
Yeah. Who are our most exciting players? Like what name should people know going into the World Cup on Team USA?
Christian Pulisic is the face of the team. He plays for AC Milan. He's arguably already the best player we've ever produced as an attacker, certainly. He's also had a big slump in the second half of his Italian season, which seems to have coincided with the breakup of his first serious girlfriend.
It happens.
Make of that what you will. It happens. Weston McKennie plays in Italy as well for Juventus. He's really fun. He's this kind of goofy army brat who came out of Texas, who's always just fooling around, messing around until a soccer game starts. And then he just turns into this all-round sort of beast who can play just about any position. Really good passer, super smart. Tyler Adams is the holding midfielder, which means that he kind of screens the defense. And he's really, really serious about his craft to the point where he refuses the traditional post-game jersey swap because he's just not interested. He's just focused all the time. There's a few interesting strikers. Flo Balogun, who's Nigerian English-American, who plays for Monaco in the French league. He's really good. Ricardo Pepi came from the borderlands. I mentioned him before, from El Paso. Had a really agonizing decision to make when he was 17 years old, whether he was going to play for the U.S. or he was going to play for Mexico. He had the option to do both, which really got into identity and assimilation and all the rest.
That's interesting.
So he's really a guy that you can root for. And then the two goalies have great backstories as well. Matt Turner, who's the starter in Qatar and who might be the number 2 at this World Cup, couldn't get on a college soccer team to save his life coming out of high school. Finally, Fairfield University takes a chance on him, and everybody missed this guy who would go on to become a Premier League and a World Cup goalkeeper. And then the other goalie, Matt Fries, is the son of a famous neurosurgeon who pioneered gene therapy. And he's from this family where everybody either has a PhD and they're a scientist, or they're in finance and in tech. And even though Matt has a degree from Harvard, he's sort of like the underachiever in the family, kind of like slumming it in pro sports, which I really like the idea of. So there's a lot of fun guys on this team.
I love this. Okay, so I have a question. Do you think that if football, basketball, and baseball were not so dominant in the United States and we were funneling our athletic talent into soccer, would we just be wiping out the world?
That's a question that's been asked a lot over the years. Like, what would happen if our best athletes played soccer? And I think it would help, certainly. But at the same time, soccer players have a very different body type than NFL players or NBA players. Like, there's really nobody much taller than 6'4", 6'5" in soccer. Yeah. So if LeBron were a soccer player, would that help us? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Out of the 5 greatest soccer players of all time, Cristiano Ronaldo is the only one who's taller than 5'10", right? So these players have a low center of gravity. I think it would help if there were more resources going into grassroots soccer and it was more affordable for more people. Because one of the things that's happened is that like all youth sports, youth soccer has been kind of devoured by the travel scene, and it's very, very expensive. And so that's why you get a disproportionate representation of the upper middle class in professional American soccer. And I do think that if there was less competition from other sports, there might be more pathways for people who can't afford travel soccer to get into the sport, just because there would be more soccer overall. Right. And so hopefully that would make it a bit more affordable.
Yeah, those pay for play things, you have to start paying and playing at a very young age. The travel, the hotels, it's a fortune. How much, do you have any idea, how much does that cost for the average family?
Oh, it can run from a few $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars. And, most of the national team players who aren't from the upper middle class. And ironically, some of our stars weren't. Landon Donovan certainly wasn't. Clint Dempsey wasn't. Now Ricardo Pepi wasn't. They kind of made it in spite of the system as it exists, right? Because Ricardo Pepi, his backstory is incredible. His father is a concrete finisher, and he went into that trade when he was 13 years old. And the only way to get Pepi in travel soccer and get him in that competition that he needed to be in was for him to basically like build his own travel soccer team on a shoestring around Ricardo.
Wow.
Just because that was the only way they could afford it. And that family, the Pepi family, stayed just on the right side of solvency for all of Ricardo's youth, which meant that there was just enough money for him to keep going. And sometimes that meant that Daniel Pepi, his dad, had to pawn the deed to their car just so they could afford the gas for Ricardo to get to whatever tournament he needed to be at. Like, it was a really close thing. So you sort of start to wonder the just sheer volume of talent that we lost along the way because they just couldn't afford, especially in the communities where soccer is the dominant sport, they couldn't afford to play at the levels where they were going to be seen and coached by the right people and have the opportunities to advance.
Well, you have just helped me identify my favorite American player now. It's Ricardo Pepi. No question after that. What's your insights on how should we fix that? Is there anything being put forth, or what did you find there when you were reporting your book?
So there's a structural issue here fundamentally, which is that I was born in the Netherlands. I grew up in Belgium. Every village and every hamlet has a soccer club, and they all have a youth system, and they're all either free or very close to free because those countries have sports ministries who subsidize these things and who get federal funds to make sure that people are playing sports. We kind of have our system the other way around, where if you can't afford travel soccer, really your only option, there's some scholarships here and there, but by and large, you're going to need to play for an MLS academy. We now have 30 Major League Soccer teams who all have a youth academy, which are free for the serious prospects. But as the director of the FC Dallas Academy put it to me, and FC Dallas has a really strong academy. That's where Pepi eventually came through. That's where Weston McKennie came through. You might, Chris Richards, you might see 3, 4, 5 players on the field for the U.S. at the World Cup who came through the FC Dallas Academy. And the point he made is that if you compare Texas and Spain, right, which is roughly the same size. Spain at any given time has about 300 professional and semi-professional soccer teams, which means there's 300 sort of professional quality environments for players to develop in. Texas has 3 fully professional soccer teams, right, or at least Major League Soccer teams. Yeah. He made the point that Dallas, which is about the size and population of Madrid, has one soccer team, has one MLS academy, theirs. Right? Madrid has about 12 professional soccer teams. So if you're a kid with any kind of talent growing up in Madrid, you're 12 times as likely to wind up in a pro academy, which is really the only serious pathway as a soccer prospect, as you do in Dallas. And Dallas is actually one of the places where we're doing it well. So we can't just rely on 30 MLS teams to be doing all of this work in a country our size. We need like 300 of them, if not 600 of them, right? And so while we've made massive strides in player development and kind of the pipelines that we offer for our talent, we're still so far removed from having the sort of infrastructure that we need.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot here with a sort of hypothetical, insane question. Given what you said given my question where I said, if all our basketball, football, baseball players were to take up soccer, and then your counterpoint about, well, those athletes are too big. If you had to pick, say, 3 athletes in their prime, American athletes that played other sports, which 3 do you think would have been best at soccer? Had they entered soccer instead of another sport, they would have been the guys.
I'm going to go with Steve Nash because he very nearly was. Because he was a soccer player growing up, and he's now a minority investor in a Spanish team, Mallorca. Someone like Saquon Barkley probably could have done well. Sort of an unconventional body type for a soccer player, kind of like Weston McKennie, who's fairly stocky for a soccer player, but it works for him. I can't even think of anybody in baseball because they're just built entirely differently. Let's see. Who's a really zippy point guard? Oh, maybe Jalen Brunson.
Okay.
I think he's quick enough and he's sort of dexterous enough. He might have made a good soccer player.
I like that. Here's who came to my mind. John Stockton. Now, the reason for that is because soccer can be a dirty sport. This guy was the dirtiest dude ever, and yet he never got caught. He's gonna do dirty stuff. He's gonna make it happen. I think maybe AI, because AI was what, like 6 feet tall? Extremely talented.
6'3", I want to say.
Oh, he was 6'3"? Okay, maybe he's cut out. And then I realize this is going against the rule of players being too big, but I just feel like Dion, with his swagger and his attitude, that would have brought something to the American squad that was just like, yeah, you're playing an American team now with all the swagger he has. I like that.
Yeah, you barge into a few guys, you send a message early on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think Saquon could do that too.
Yes.
All right, so once Team USA gets eliminated, unfortunately, it'll probably happen. Give listeners some teams and players they should root for in the following categories. European powerhouse. Who's an interesting team to watch and root for?
I think France is the best team, but they don't always play the most attractive soccer. Spain is really fun to watch because they're young and experienced, and they have Lamine Yamal, who's sort of the heir apparent to Lionel Messi, who's only 18 years old and who has already led Spain to the European Championship when he was 16. And turned 16 during that tournament. He was 15 when it started, which soccer. But the funnest European team is Portugal, if they bench Cristiano Ronaldo.
If they bench, all right, you gotta unpack that one.
Ronaldo's 41 years old now. He can't move anymore. I don't know if it's the Botox or the fake bronzer, but he's just a husk of himself. But he has so much clout that like the Portuguese coach doesn't dare put him on the bench. Portugal has some of the funnest, most creative players out there. Bruno Fernandes, Bernardo Silva, Vitinha. These guys are really, really fun to watch. But when they have Ronaldo playing up front who doesn't move, it sort of really drags them down. So if Ronaldo's not on the field, I'll go with Portugal. If he is, I'll go with Spain.
I just want to say that I'm going to be laughing for the rest of the day about he's a husk of himself. That's just amazing. Underdog nation.
Norway has not been to the World Cup since 1998. In Erling Haaland, they have the most sort of their cyborg striker from Manchester City. They have just the most incredible athlete, probably at the World Cup. The guy is huge. I mean, speaking of football or basketball players, in soccer, and he nevertheless can move as well as anyone. He's just a goal machine. They have a few other good talents up front, and they have Martin Ødegaard, the playmaker for Arsenal, who just won the Premier League. I think they're going to surprise some people. Turkey's an underdog team as well. They're in the same group as the U.S., which is a little concerning, and they were the last team to come into that group through a playoff. They have in Kenan Yildiz and Arda Güler, they have a pair of 21-year-old winger playmaker-y types who are incredibly talented. They play for Real Madrid and Juventus. So I think they're going to catch some people by surprise as well.
Who's the fittest team, like physically fittest team?
Historically, it would be the U.S., and that was kind of their calling card. I don't know if they are so much this time around. I think what you're going to see at this tournament is that countries from hotter climates are going to do well just because the temperatures here are, it's going to be a bit of a shock for some of those players. Like when I say Norway, that's if they can figure out how to function in the heat and not wilt and just kind of melt on the field, because the Norwegian summer is not the same as the Meadowlands summer, right, shall we say. Who's the fittest team? It's usually someone like Japan or Korea.
Okay. What's your favorite player to watch? It's just magical to watch. A lot of fun.
This is a really boring answer, but even he's going to be 39 during this tournament. Like Lionel Messi just still does things on the field that, after 25 years of watching soccer professionally, still just blow my mind. So Messi's incredibly fun. Lamine Yamal, who I mentioned, is amazing. The French have some really fun young players. Désiré Doué, Bradley Barcola. There's some real young talents in this tournament, which is ironic because there's also kind of this last dance energy for guys like Ronaldo and Messi, where we all thought that they were done after the last World Cup in Qatar. And you're like, well, surely they're not going to play into their 40s or close to 40. And it's like, oh, well, here they are doing it again. Yeah. So there might be a real changing of the guard at this tournament too.
I love that. All right. So big picture question. What do you think the trajectory of U.S. soccer with, some of the ups, the downs, and now this trajectory where we might actually start getting good. What do you feel like that tells us about how institutions improve over the long run? Like, what are some lessons we can pull from that?
So one of the things that made me want to write this book that I wrote about the U.S. national team, the long game, is just how completely that program had collapsed. So in 1950, the U.S. Scores one of the great upsets to this day in World Cup history when they beat England 1-0 with a team made up of literally dishwashers and like paint strippers. And they play the great England team and they beat them. And then after that, soccer just collapses in this country. They went 11 years between the 1950s and 60s without winning a single game, right? They were losing games 8-0, 10-0. They'd show up for World Cup qualifiers and they'd be like, oh, there's no jerseys or there's no balls. Or sometimes they didn't have a coach. They once turned up to a game without enough players. And this is a World Cup qualifier. This is like the biggest deal outside of a World Cup. And they had to pull a guy from the stands just to make up the numbers, right? So to have come from that place, to start building infrastructure again in the 80s, to regularly get back to soccer in the 90s, and then by 2002 to make it to a quarterfinal and to become a fixture in the knockout stages of the World Cup. I think what that all showed is that the work that had to be done was structural and was organizational. And they had to get the systems in place to not just develop one team, but to keep developing teams and to create kind of frameworks that they could turn to again and again that built kind of a style and an identity and some core values for how this program was going to operate. That's really been the backbone to what is a pretty miraculous rise in the sporting sense.
I love it. All right, final question. Who's your prediction for who wins it all?
I think France. I don't think they're going to look very attractive doing it because their coach, Didier Deschamps, he's won a World Cup as a player. He won a World Cup as a coach in 2018. They lost the final on penalties in 2022. They've mostly done it playing pretty defensive, pragmatic soccer. This time around, his arm might be twisted a little bit because they're much stronger up front than they are in midfield or defense. But I think nevertheless, he's going to sort of suffer ball, as we call it, his way through this tournament. So I think it'll be France because they have the talent and the experience, but they won't be the best team to look at.
I love it. All right. Well, the book is The Long Game. Leander, thanks so much for coming on, man. That was fantastic. I feel like I'm up to date on this World Cup thing. Like I'm ready to go.
Awesome. That's what we're here for. Thanks for having me.
All right, now that you know why Team USA might actually be good this year and why you should care, we're going to bring on Dr. Daniel Wann, who's going to tie it all together and explain why caring about sports in general is really good for us. Daniel, thanks for coming on 2%.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, so you've been studying the psychology of sports fandom for 40 years. ESPN calls you Dr. Fandom. We're going to get into some of the mental health benefits, but here's what I thought was interesting. Your research suggests that rooting for a distant team, so say I live in France, but I'm rooting for Team USA, doesn't give the same benefits as following a local team. Why is that? Why is that?
So that's what the theory says. That's what the framework says. And truth in advertising, these are frameworks that were developed prior to or at the start of social media becoming what it is today. I and several of my colleagues that study sport fandom have the absolute belief that any theory or perspective that was developed on sport fandom more than 20 years ago, more than 15 years ago even, probably needs to be tweaked. And I think this is a great example of where that may be the case. The thinking at the time when that approach was written and was clearly backed up by the data was that if you are a local sport fan, you're going to have readily available connections to others around you. So let's say that you're a fan of the Buffalo Bills and you're walking around a mall in Buffalo. Well, you're going to come across a lot of people that share this powerful link with you. You might not know their name, you might not know where they work or what they do, but you still see them wearing the attire, and so you know you have this connection. The reality was those connections were much more difficult to find as a displaced or distant fan. But that's 15 or 20 years ago. I don't think it's as difficult today. Certainly, it's not the same. So if you are a Manchester United fan and it's 25 years ago and you live in Boston, it's really hard to feel connected to Manchester United fans. In 2026, it's a lot easier. Is it the same as living in the environment where that team is from? No, it's not the same. But I do think that we're now seeing that there are benefits to being a displaced fan that might not have been there before, because you can watch these things, you can stream the events while you're talking to other people across the globe, and it's going to feel a little bit more like you are actually there in that environment.
That makes sense. And I feel like, a lot of this comes back to connection. I feel like that's why prior to the rise of social media, for example, in bigger cities, you would have bars that were specifically for a team. Like New York City would have a Dallas Cowboys bar. They would have a Pittsburgh Steelers bar. They would have a Red Sox bar, God forbid. So is that kind of what people were after?
Yes, that's exactly the point. So in Nashville, there are some Green Bay Packer bars. And so the thinking was, and again, the research would back this up, that these displaced fans, they may not get the trait level, the enduring or chronic psychological benefits. But for those moments in time when they found themselves consuming their team with other fans. So if you are a Packers fan and you live in Nashville, then you're not getting any Packers love throughout the week. But on the weekend, if you head to the Packer bar on a Sunday and there's 100 other Packers fans there, at that moment in time, you'll get these state benefits, right? For that brief moment in time, those 3 or 4 hours, your sense of social connection will go up. Your sense of alienation will go down. Your sense of isolation socially will go down. Your sense of self-esteem through your group memberships will go up. So you can get both these temporary benefits from fandom, but also more of these chronic benefits if you actually live in the environment where that team is found.
Yeah, you hinted at some of the benefits. So what are they? It's more social connection, less alienation, less isolation, lower feelings of loneliness. Is that kind of what we're talking about? Do we miss anything?
Yeah. We are having a very difficult time finding a social benefit that is not related to sport fandom. I think our list is up to like 28 different measures of social well-being, whether it's social self-esteem or alienation, loneliness, anything connected to one's sense of attachment to others stands to benefit through their attachment to a sport team, because when you attach to a sport team, what that brings with it is other people. And I absolutely believe, my 40 years of doing this stuff on sport fans, if someone were to say what one word sums all of this up, without question, connections. That's what it is. Whether it's a connection that the fan has with the team, with the players, with the stadium, with other fans, for heaven's sakes, how many other connections can you get? Go to an Ohio State football game, right? There's 100,000 other connections that you can gain. And that's not with the beer people and with the popcorn people and with the cheerleaders and with the band and the players and the other people in the press box. So many connections to be gained through sport fandom. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, the primary driver of this pastime.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you identified these 4 psychological needs that fandom helps meet. Do you want to walk us through those so we kind of understand? One is belonging, and then there's a few others, right?
One of the ways that my presentation of sport fandom has changed over the years. Early on, when I was doing this stuff, I found out that the media really likes to talk to people about sport fandom because the vast majority of their listeners are sport fans, and so it plays pretty well. So I found myself talking to media types a lot back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, and I found people were very genuinely interested in what I was doing, which was great. But I would always sort of preface it with, well, let's remember, I'm not curing cancer. I'm just studying sports fans. I absolutely do not qualify my research anymore because we now know that fandom is a much bigger deal than we gave it credit for decades past. We now know that sport fandom is a primary conduit through which individuals are able to meet multiple basic innate psychological needs. I think first and foremost, as you mentioned, was the need to belong. When you ask fans, which of these needs do they believe fandom is best at meeting? They actually will also say that it's the need to belong. It provides people with a sense of community, with a sense of camaraderie. However, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a big tip. It's an important tip, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. What you find is, in addition to belonging, sport fandom allows people to meet their basic need for distinctiveness or uniqueness. We have a desire to feel special. Sure, we want to fit in. We want to feel some link with those around us, but we don't want to be like carbon copies, right? We don't want to be clones. I've always found it interesting that when you talk to somebody that's a big sports fan and you find out where they're from and you say, okay, so, what teams do you follow? So you say to somebody who's from Kansas City, so, who are your favorite teams? Oh, I love the Jayhawks from KU, and I love the Chiefs, and I love the Royals, and I love Manchester United. And it always makes me laugh because it's like that Sesame Street song of, one of these things is not like the other, one of these things is not the same. There's always one that stands out, and that's the one that allows them to meet their need for their need for distinctiveness. It lets them feel that, yeah, okay, I'm like others, but I'm not exactly like others. We want to fit in while simultaneously standing out.
Yeah.
Sport fandom really has the ability to do that. A third important need is the need for structure. I really don't believe that we have given this need from a sport fandom perspective its due credit, because sport fandom allows fans to set their daily schedule, their weekly schedule, their seasonal and their monthly and their annual. I mean, how many people, sports fans and otherwise, how many people already have on their calendar for the next Super Bowl that they're going to throw their Super Bowl party for, right?
Yeah.
They set their whole winter calendar around their Super Bowl party. I'll have as an aside, the Super Bowl next year follows on Valentine's Day, so I think there's going to be some interesting relationship negotiations that will be going on. But we set our daily calendars, our weekly calendars through sport fandom. We had this need for structure. We have a need for routine. And what better way to do that than to know, well, okay, it's the summertime, so every night at 7:30, there's going to be a baseball game. It's the fall. Every Saturday, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, football. Sunday, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, nighttime game. And it gives people a sense of continuity throughout, what for many people is kind of disjointed, chaotic lives. And fourth, and also you can't undersell this, is the need for meaning, the need for purpose. Fandom gives individuals a reason to wake up in the morning. And when fans are highly invested in their team during the season, outside of the season, they wake up and it gives them something to think about, something to be excited about, something to care about. It's interesting when researchers have done investigations on meaning and they ask sports fans up front, how does fandom provide meaning? These researchers will tell you that the most common response is, it doesn't. And then the researcher's like, well, wait a minute, it doesn't. And then when they explain to it, all of a sudden the fan realizes, oh, wait, it actually does. I think that fans, they don't always know, just the ways that fandom is improving and making a difference in their lives, until they start to actually think about it. And then like, oh my gosh, yes, it's a bigger deal than I even gave her credit for.
Yeah. That reminds me of Atul Gawande, the doctor, has this book called Being Mortal on end-of-life care. And he was doing a bunch of surveys and interviews around that and just thinking about, okay, end-of-life care, how do we approach this? And one of the anecdotes that stuck with me is a father told their kids were like, hey, how long do you want us to keep you around with the, advanced medical care when it's clear to the end? And he stopped and he goes, as long as I can watch football while I eat ice cream, keep me going. Once that stops, I'm good to go. That was like the thing that's like that was the meaning piece, and ideally with family and others around.
Yeah, life's simple pleasures, right? And I love how that individual articulated that, but isn't that true for so many people, right? And maybe not, how long should we keep you around? But if you ask people, what joys do you find in life? So many sport fans will say, I think about growing up and watching games with my family and with my friends. And now, I'm taking my own kids and my own family going to sporting events. And again, I don't think on the surface, sport fans are sitting there, meditating and thinking about how fandom matters in these ways. At least I hope they're not. That's my job. But when you talk to them about it more in detail, they will all of a sudden have this almost light bulb moment. It's fun, actually, as a researcher to bring these to their attention, because you can just see the wheels start to fire. Oh, you're right. This matters in profound and important ways that I, quite frankly, didn't give it credit for.
Yeah. Is there a dose? So if we think about this as something that improves, like what is the ideal approach for someone to get the benefits? Or are we overthinking it with that question?
Yeah, I think that ideally, we know that there's two routes to well-being through fandom. One is a function of how well the team is performing, right? I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Winning beats losing, right? I mean, winning smiles, not so much with losing. The second route, through the connections to other people, it's not a function of the team's success. So it's a function of simply having those social connections that come through the team. I guess then the best of all worlds would be finding yourself in an environment where you have attached to a successful team, a team that wins a lot and also happens to have a strong following, so you have connections to others. That's the ideal approach. The problem with that is that losing is much more frequent in sport than winning. I always like to think about like the NCAA basketball tournament. So many people point out that the NCAA men's basketball tournament is like the greatest sports spectacle that we have out there now. Okay, well, there's like over 350 men's teams. Only one of those fan bases at the end of the season is actually smiling. So if you're going to put all of your chips on that route, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed. I would suggest, if you have to choose, go the route with the connections, because it's not there just a function of how good your team is. It's always there.
Yeah. So in terms of connections, do these have to be in person? So that what I'm thinking about is, unfortunately, I'm a long-suffering Utah Jazz fan. So when they're playing and when they're good, which is rare, my friends from Utah and I live in Las Vegas now, we'll text about the games. We'll be going back and forth. But I'm watching alone because my wife, not a huge basketball fan. Am I still getting those connections via text, via occasional phone conversations about the team?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually some of the more recent research is that we're starting to find scientifically that people are gaining important connections, and as a consequence, these important well-being benefits through this displaced fandom. So you don't have to be in the arena. You can be at home watching it on TV. You can be at work and just conversing with some work colleagues about the game. And also, it's critically important to know that these connections, they do not have to be deep. We know from research in sports fandom, but also general social psychology, that even very peripheral, temporary, quick, almost naive types of relationships matter. Just a hi to a stranger on the street is enough to give this person a sense of connectivity. So the hi to the stranger who happens to also be wearing the Utah Jazz baseball cap, that's just, doubly good, I suppose.
Does this same phenomenon broadly apply to anything with a fan base? I'll give you an example. I'm also a big fan of the Grateful Dead. And so if I'm wearing one of my Grateful Dead shirts in public, like I was at Costco 3 months ago, and I'm wearing a Jerry Garcia t-shirt. It's tie-dye, of course, because it has to be. And
that's the law.
Guy comes up to me and he goes, "Oh, did you see the Dead shows at the Sphere?" And we start talking for like 30 minutes. So can these same phenomenon be found in any sort of niche fandom?
Yeah, 100%. There's nothing that says you can't gain psychological benefits basically from any connection. Certainly people have done this through work, through religious affiliations, through fraternities and sororities for many, many decades. I will, however, say that there's a couple of things about sport fandom that make it unique and perhaps particularly well positioned to lead to these benefits. One, it is absolutely a social endeavor. It's not just social before you consume and after you consume. It's social while you consume. So Grateful Dead concerts also have this benefit to it, right? So people can gain important connections through opera fandom, through book clubs. You're not supposed to be social while consuming those things, right? If you are social while watching the opera, they're going to ask you to no longer watch the opera. You'll get escorted out, right? You can belong to a book club and talk about the book after you've read it. You're not talking about the book while you're reading it, right? Game of Thrones, when Game of Thrones was on, and I'd be at home and my kids would be watching it, there was no talking, right? I mean, every cell phone was off. The lights were out. If the door bell rang, too bad for whoever's package arrived. The door's not being opened up. Now, after the fact, lots of discussion. Sport fandom, we are social before, during, and after. That's one way it's different from many other types of fandoms. And a second critically important way is, so how many Grateful Dead concerts have you seen?
Oh, it's 30.
Okay. And what's your favorite song?
My favorite song is probably Brown Eyed Women.
Excellent. And that song never changes. I mean, yes, there are, idiosyncrasies from one concert to another. Yeah. It doesn't change. My wife, Michelle, and I went to our fourth Alabama concert the other night.
Okay.
And let's not kid ourselves. One of the nice things about concerts is they're supposed to sort of play the songs the way you remember hearing them on the radio and things like that. Right. Okay. Doesn't matter how many times you go to a Star Wars movie. Darth Vader always ends up being Luke Skywalker's father.
Yeah.
Sport is different because the outcome is not scripted. You don't know. And so that intensifies everything. It intensifies the emotional reactions. It intensifies the stress and the anxiety. It intensifies the buildup. If you intensify emotions and then you gain connections through something, the emotions tied to those connections will be just that much greater, right? So because you don't know what's happening, you literally see fans like holding on to each other like what's going to happen next. I don't think that anybody who's going to see a Star Wars movie for the 8th time is holding on to each other trying to figure out what's going to happen next, right? You know what's going to happen. Sport is different.
And when those perfect moments do happen in sports, especially if you are with other people, you could be at the stadium, but you could also be at like a packed bar watching the game. It's just this big moment. It's like this collective effervescence is a term that I've heard thrown around. And what is it about those moments that just like, those are iconic in American history? Like when we think of American history and we show the sort of photo book, there's like the typical things you think, but then there's also Muhammad Ali standing over, and then there's also Miracle on Ice. Like these moments are sports in a universal, like the world would go on maybe if we didn't have sports, but these moments are so important nonetheless for our sense of community.
Yeah. And again, I think that is another way that we establish our routines around sport, not just what we think is going to happen, but our recollections of life are based on these events, right? They're structured around these events. They talk a lot about for the athlete side of sports psychology, when athletes get into a flow. I've been asked before, what's the sport fan equivalent of that? And I honestly believe it's when a sport fan finds themselves at the event when one of those moments is going down. Or perhaps when they're watching one of those moments with family and friends. I distinctly remember where I was when the Miracle on Ice happened. I was in a Motel 6 near a ski resort in Minnesota, very cold, by the way, with my younger brother and my father, right? And I can distinctly remember the entire event. And this has been a while now, right? I think that when fans are lucky enough to find themselves in attendance at those events where they are seeing things that obviously they didn't know that they were going to see, because again, these aren't scripted events, and they become so memorable that they are life-changing, not in the sense of more money, not in the sense of a better job, but in a sense of they have now gained a memory that nobody can take away from them. Knicks fans that happen to be in San Antonio, right? They will never forget that. And when they are asked, what's their best memory, they will say, as they pause and decide not to say watching the Knicks, and then say my wedding and the birth of my child, and then they'll say watching the Knicks win, because they don't want to get in trouble. The people that watch the Cubs win after they just had one down century. What's so bad about one down century? They talk and reminisce about what it was like watching it at the bar with their friends, or at the event. Years ago, the Racers were having a really, really good basketball season, the men's team. And it was back when they had those, ESPN would put on those matchups midway through the spring semester, where they bring in really good teams to play. One of the mid-majors would play one another in these bracket buster competitions. And we had a top-ranked team, and they brought St. Mary's with Matthew Dellavedova to come play our team. And Dick Vitale shows up to do the commentary.
Awesome.
And everybody that was there still talks about it as the event. I mean, it wasn't a championship game. Yes, we won, but we didn't win a trophy or anything, right? It was just a non-conference game. But people that were there talk about it in a way that there's reverence in the way they talk about it.
I think what's interesting, too, is, you could probably argue that America is more politically divided than it has been in the last, 50, 100 years, whatever number you want to put on it. But sports kind of gets past that, right? It's like you're in a bar watching a game, wherever it might be. You don't see the person who's a fan of the same team of you and goes, hey, who did you vote for? Oh, okay. Now that we have that prior, we can talk about that. Like, that doesn't happen. People just talk and connect over it. It kind of crosses a lot of these issues we have.
Absolutely. They've talked about sport being the great equalizer. I could argue that fandom is the great unifier, because it really does cut across demographics, politics, and so on and so forth. If you're a fan of my team, when we are consuming our team, I will forgive you for all of your other transgressions. I don't care about your politics, your religion. Now, once the game is over, all bets may be off, but we do share this common bond. And what they've actually found is that by making these common bonds salient, you can actually reduce intergroup conflict. It's quite an effective way by letting people know, wait, sure, you have this group membership that is in opposition and the rival of this other, but yet you share the same common bond. You can take two rival sport teams, but when you remind them at the end of the day, you're both soccer fans, it has the ability to reduce the animosity between the two groups.
Yeah, I feel like you're kind of seeing that now with the World Cup. So you have all these people from across the world coming to the United States of America, and you've seen these amazing reels on Instagram and TikTok where you have, Germans coming in and they're going, we're going to Taco Bell. We've never been to Taco Bell. This place is the holy grail. And it's just been this amazing melding of people coming in and experiencing America and really loving it, almost at a time where I feel like we kind of need it.
Yeah, it's not a bad time right now in our country to have people from other countries go, hey, it's all right over here.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good thing.
So sports stadiums in particular, a lot of times they'll get pushed back because it's going to cost a lot of taxpayer dollars to build this stadium. From your research, could you almost argue, though, that having a strong sports culture in a city is almost a means of improving public health?
Well, yeah. I mean, the research is very clear on that. Not just mental health, but physical health. I mean, if you make individuals aware of a sport by hosting an event, I mean, there's going to be a trickle down to where maybe they're going to want to go out and try that sport, right? I mean, you could think of situations in the U.S. right now where, families are watching the World Cup and the 8-year-old kid is like, hey, Dad, let's go outside and kick around the soccer ball, right? Hey, Mom, let's go kick out the soccer ball. So there's no reason to think that it wouldn't trickle down physically as well as psychologically. It's such a great debate as to, is there ultimately a bang for the buck? Because let's not kid ourselves, it's a lot of buck, right? I mean, it's not like you're talking about, oh yeah, we should spend another $100,000 to build a stadium. You're a lot of zeros shy when you say things like that. I mean, it's almost like pretend money. It's monopoly money, right? And so, I mean, certainly there's data out there that shows that there are situations where, economies probably haven't made back what they wanted by building these stadiums. But how do you put a dollar figure on giving members of your community an important way to connect? I don't know how you put a dollar figure on that. I just know that when communities decide not to build the stadiums, decide not to be held hostage, quite frankly, for building these stadiums, and then the team moves, there are a lot of people whose lives they're negatively touched by that, right? Yeah. I mean, there's a loss. You don't want to say that's a loss equivalent to the loss of a loved one, but it's a close second. I mean, talk to lifelong fans of the Oakland A's, right? When they left town. I mean, I had some people would say to me, it's not like I lost a loved one, but it's like I lost a limb, which is pretty good, right? I mean, that's not like, okay, I didn't just lose a goldfish, I lost my arm. Part of us is ripped away when these teams lose. And so how do you place a financial value on that? I don't know, right? I don't know what that number is. So, as a fan of Kansas City teams, certainly we always seem to be threatened to have the Royals leave us or something. And I know that it would be a great loss for that community, for the hundreds of thousands of Royals and the millions of Royals fans in the greater area. What's the dollar of value on that? Do they get the money back by building a new stadium? I don't know. Psychologically, it's of critical importance.
Yeah, and I'll tell you on the flip side, living in Las Vegas, I feel like this team or this city really became united and found an identity beyond just like, oh yeah, we're the place that people come in for 3 days to lose their money and go home. Once we got the Golden Knights, like that was this great unifier, and the city almost took on, okay, we're a real city now because we have the Golden Knights, and just the amount of things that happen around the Knights in this town are unbelievable.
Yeah, and it really didn't surprise any of us who study sport fan scientifically because of the way that community would rally around UNLV basketball. Those years. I mean, that's pretty good fan passion behind those teams. And so why would you not expect them to be able to say, oh, this is now our own professional team. We've now, upped the game a little bit. No surprise at all. And your gain is another community's loss.
Yeah. And I love what you said in the beginning about how a lot of sort of points of view in this research space are changing because of the rise of online digital media. We hear so much about, negativity about, social media and all this, we spend too much time on our devices. But if you're using it in a way that sort of builds this connection to sports and other people, and I even think of something like fantasy football, like playing that in the past used to be a huge pain. No one did it. But now every single year, I have the same core group of 10 guys I went to high school with, and we always do fantasy football, and we're always going to connect around that for the NFL season.
Fantasy football is an interesting thing, right? I mean, I go back to the early 80s when rotisserie baseball just started out, and we were playing that stuff back in the 80s, and we would have to call different cities' newspapers to try and get intel on the players. I remember calling the Los Angeles newspapers, is Tom Niedenfuller going to be the closer for the Dodgers? Because there was no intel. Now everybody knows all the same things. Yeah. And it allows people again, to structure their lives in ways that give them connections to others. And you, again, I don't know how you place a dollar figure on that. Those are invaluable. We certainly see the value of fantasy football, and interestingly enough, so does the NFL. They were absolutely against that to begin with, right? I mean, they're like, we don't want the fantasy football is going to take over and it's going to change how people watch games. And then somebody at their office said, well, it might change how they watch games by changing it so that they watch more games where their team isn't playing. And now you've got things like, Red Zone, which is just a fantasy football channel, right? Just to watch your players try and score touchdowns. And the NFL is all about fantasy football because they figured out that, hey, when TVs are turned on, that's a good thing, regardless of why the TV is turned on.
Yeah. Is there any way that being into sport, can you overdo interest in sports? Is there ever any time where you overdo it and it starts becoming negative in your life?
Yeah, you can overdo everything. Right? I mean, you can overdo your job. You can overdo school. You can overdo, how much you check up on your kids, right? I mean, everything can be overdone. And, I think that when I'm lecturing on this in my class, I always tell the students, though, we're going to paint a picture that shows that fandom is a very positive thing for individuals and societies, but we're also going to be absolutely honest and admit that there's a darker side as well. I mean, there are people that they get too wrapped up in these things, then they get violent. There are people that spend too much time doing these things, and their relationships can suffer, their work productivity can suffer. Certainly now we're seeing that there are people that have fallen prey to gambling addiction from sport wagering. I think that first and foremost, you have to acknowledge that that's the case. Yeah. It's the case with every pastime. And then also I think you have to say and be honest with the fact that it's extremely rare. The number of relationships, for example, that are negatively impacted by sport fandom is like 1% to 2%. But although that's a very minuscule number, 1% to 2% of all of the people in the U.S. that are sports fans, that number is a lot of people. So I think it's worthy of study. You just have to keep it in perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, final question. If someone is listening to this and they're like, I haven't really been into sports, but I think you might have sold me on this thing. Where do they start? What's the playbook? Is it like find a local team? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I think that my suggestion would be find a friend, a loved one, family member that has a deep, and given our previous conversation about overdoing it, a deep and, reasonable connection to a sport team, and ask if you can tag along to an event, right? Ask if you can, can I like glum off on you and go to the event and see what this is all about? And I think that a fair number of them will find out, this is actually quite fun. This is actually quite enjoyable. Not everybody will, right? Sports isn't for everybody. Neither is the opera, right? Yeah. But certainly there are people who have gone to their first opera and now they love the opera. There are people that go to their first sporting event, but go with a friend, go with a family member, someone who knows the details of the team and can explain things to you. And that will give you insight to the team, to the sport, and you won't just be sitting there wondering what in the world is going on right now.
I love it. All right. Final question, Daniel. You talked about how there's distinctiveness is one of the key components. Everyone has their Sesame Street team. This one is not like the others. What's your Sesame Street team?
Yeah, I suppose I got a lot of them because I'm a displaced fan, right? I absolutely, first and foremost, love the Murray State Racers, the men's basketball team. That's where that's where Michelle and I met. We have the best tickets in the house. We have center court on the aisle, third row up. But I'm from Kansas, so I'm a Jayhawk fan in Kentucky. So, that's enemy territory. I'm a Royals fan where everybody here loves the Cardinals. I'm a Chiefs fan where people love the Titans. So my wife is an Ohio State grad, so we like Ohio State. So I have a lot more ways that I'm unique as a fan, right? My distinctiveness is greater than my belonging, but because the racers are such a powerful draw, it probably works out to be 50-50.
There you go. I like it. I think that's a lot of people today. People are moving around more than ever. It's like you kind of pick your teams, you get maybe one in the city you're in, great, but you have these ancillary teams and you kind of bundle it up and it all turns out to be good.
Exactly.
Well, with all that said, long live sports. And Daniel, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Thanks for checking out the show. Thanks to Leander and Daniel for coming on to talk about Team USA and sports in general. As a reminder, we are in your feed twice a week, so please keep an eye out for more. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you get those updates. And you know what I'm a fan of? More apps on my phone, which brings me to the iHeart Video app. You can download it and you can watch these episodes at any time. As always, have fun, don't die.